My sister told me I didn't deserve a +1 to her wedding. What she didn't know was that my date would be the man who broke her heart 2 years ago, and he had no idea she was the bride. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from, and if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. Madison Moore had always been the overlooked sister. While her older sister Victoria commanded attention with her perfectly styled blonde hair and designer clothes, Madison preferred staying in the background with her books and quiet demeanor. At 26, she worked as a freelance graphic designer from her small apartment in Portland, Oregon, living a simple life that rarely intersected with Victoria's glamorous world in Seattle. The wedding invitation arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered with Victoria's usual dramatic flair. Heavy cream cardstock with gold embossing announced the union of Victoria Ann Moore and Jonathan Christopher Hayes. Madison stared at the invitation, feeling that familiar knot in her stomach, another reminder of how different their lives had become. She called Victoria that evening, phone pressed against her ear as she sat cross-legged on her worn couch. "Congratulations, Vic. The invitation is beautiful." "Thank you, Maddie. I'm so excited you can make it." Victoria's voice carried that practiced sweetness she used with clients at her marketing firm. "Just so you know, we're keeping the guest list intimate, close family and friends only." Madison picked at a loose thread on her sweater. Of course, should I put down a +1 or... Actually, no. The response came quick and sharp. "We're really trying to keep numbers down, and honestly, you don't really have anyone serious right now, do you? It would just be a waste of a seat." The words hit like a slap. Madison felt heat rise to her cheeks, that old familiar shame creeping in. Even at her own wedding, Victoria couldn't resist making her feel small. Right, of course, just me then. Perfect, love you, sis. The line went dead, leaving Madison staring at her reflection in the black phone screen. 26 years old and still letting her sister make her feel like the awkward teenager who couldn't get a prom date. 3 weeks later, Madison found herself at Riverside Cafe, her favorite quiet spot overlooking the Willamette River. She'd been coming here every Saturday morning for 2 years, ordering the same vanilla latte and blueberry scone while working on freelance projects. It was her sanctuary, predictable and peaceful. That particular Saturday, the usual corner table was occupied by a man with dark hair bent over a laptop, surrounded by legal documents. Madison hesitated, then approached the counter to order, stealing glances at the stranger. He looked frustrated, running his hands through his hair as he stared at the screen. "Excuse me," she found herself saying, surprising herself with her boldness. "Are you okay? You look like you're wrestling with your computer." He looked up, revealing warm brown eyes and a slightly crooked smile. "Is it that obvious? I'm trying to format a legal brief, and this software is determined to make my life difficult." "I'm a graphic designer. Want me to take a look?" "Would you? That would be amazing. I'm David, by the way. David Chen." Madison. She slid into the chair across from him, immediately noticing how his whole demeanor changed when he smiled. There was something genuine about him, unlike the performative charm she was used to from Victoria's circle. "So, what kind of law do you practice?" she asked, fingers flying over his keyboard as she adjusted margins and formatting. "Family law, mostly. Divorce mediation, custody agreements. Not the most glamorous, but I like helping people navigate difficult transitions." He paused, studying her face. "What about you? What kind of design work?" "Branding, mostly. Small businesses, local nonprofits. Nothing exciting." "Are you kidding? That's incredible. You're literally helping people build their dreams from the ground up." Madison felt something flutter in her chest. When was the last time someone had spoken about her work with such enthusiasm? They talked for 2 hours. David told her about growing up in San Francisco, his decision to move to Portland after law school, his love of hiking, and terrible cooking skills. Madison found herself sharing stories she rarely told anyone, her struggles with freelancing, her complicated relationship with her family, her dream of someday illustrating children's books. "I can't believe I'm saying this," David said as they walked along the riverfront afterward, "but would you maybe want to have dinner sometime?" Madison's immediate instinct was to make an excuse, to retreat to the safety of her solitude, but something about David made her want to be brave. I'd like that. Their first official date was at a small Italian restaurant in the Pearl District. David arrived with a single sunflower, Madison's favorite, though she'd never told him that. Over plates of pasta and glasses of wine, they discovered an easy rhythm of conversation that felt effortless and natural. "Tell me about your family," David said, twirling linguine around his fork. Madison hesitated. "It's complicated. I have an older sister, Victoria. She's very successful, very put together. We're quite different. Different how? She's the golden child, always has been. Beautiful, confident, gets everything she wants. I'm the quiet one who fades into the wallpaper." David set down his fork, studying her face. "I find that hard to believe. You're one of the most interesting people I've ever met. You haven't met Victoria. I don't want to meet Victoria. I want to know you." The sincerity in his voice made Madison's breath catch. She wasn't used to being someone's first choice, wasn't used to mattering. Over the next month, they fell into an easy routine. Saturday morning coffee dates turned into weekend hikes in the Columbia River Gorge. David would text him funny memes during his lunch breaks, and Madison would send him photos of designs she was working on. He was the first person to see her illustration portfolio, encouraging her to submit to publishers even when she doubted herself. "You have this way of seeing the world," he told her one evening as they sat on her fire escape sharing takeout Chinese food. "Victoria always said I overthink everything. Victoria sounds like she doesn't know what she's talking about." Madison laughed, realizing she hadn't thought about her sister's wedding in weeks. The knot of anxiety she'd carried since receiving the invitation had loosened, replaced by something warmer and more hopeful. It was during their 6th week of dating that the idea struck her. She was lying in David's arms after they'd spent the afternoon exploring Powell's books, feeling more content than she had in years. "My sister's wedding is next month," she said quietly. "The successful one?" "That's her. It's going to be this big, fancy affair in Seattle, very exclusive guest list." David's fingers traced patterns on her shoulder. "Sounds intimidating." "She told me I couldn't bring a plus one, said I didn't deserve one since I don't have anyone serious." Madison propped herself up on her elbow to look at him. "But I do now, don't I?" His smile was soft and certain. "You absolutely do." Would you want to come with me? I know it's a lot to ask, meeting my family and everything." "Madison, I'd be honored to be your date." The relief she felt was overwhelming. For once in her life, she wouldn't be the pitiful single sister standing alone at a family event. She'd have David beside her, kind, successful, handsome David who chose her over everyone else. That night, she called Victoria. "Vic, it's me. About the wedding, I actually do have a plus one after all." The pause on the other end stretched uncomfortably long. "Maddie, we already finalized the seating chart and the catering count." "I'll pay for the extra meal. Please, Victoria. His name is David, and he's really important to me." Another pause. Madison could practically hear her sister's irritation through the phone. "Fine. But he needs to wear a proper suit, not some discount store nonsense. This is a high-class event." "He's a lawyer, Vic. I think he can manage appropriate attire." "A lawyer? Well, that's surprising. What kind of law?" "Family law. He's really wonderful, Victoria. I think you'll like him." "I'm sure he's lovely. Just make sure he understands this isn't some casual backyard barbecue." A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. Madison hung up feeling victorious for the first time in her relationship with her sister. She had someone who cared about her, someone who saw her worth. Victoria could try to diminish her all she wanted, but Madison would walk into that wedding with confidence, with David's hand in hers. She had no way of knowing that David Chen had once been David Christopher Chen, that he'd legally shortened his name after a painful breakup 2 years earlier. She didn't know that he'd fled Seattle for Portland, trying to escape memories of a woman who'd shattered his heart so completely that he'd changed cities, changed his name, and sworn off serious relationships until he'd met a quiet graphic designer in a riverside cafe. And David had no idea that the Victoria who'd destroyed him was about to become his girlfriend's sister-in-law, or that walking into that Seattle ballroom would be like stepping directly into his worst nightmare. The drive from Portland to Seattle on Friday afternoon gave Madison time to second-guess everything. David sat in the passenger seat of her Honda Civic, scrolling through work emails while she navigated Interstate 5 traffic. Every few miles, she'd glance at him, still amazed that this confident, accomplished man had chosen her. "Tell me again about the groom," David said, setting his phone aside. "Jonathan, right?" "Jonathan Hayes. He's some kind of investment banker. Victoria met him at a charity gala 18 months ago." Madison switched lanes, following signs toward downtown Seattle. Apparently, he swept her off her feet with expensive dinners and weekend trips to wine country. "Sounds like Victoria's type." "You have no idea. She's always been drawn to money and status. Even in high school, she'd only date guys who drove nice cars or whose parents had impressive jobs." David was quiet for a moment, staring out the window at the Seattle skyline emerging through the gray afternoon haze. Something flickered across his face, a shadow Madison couldn't quite read. "You okay?" "Yeah, I haven't been back to Seattle in a while. Brings back memories." Madison reached over and squeezed his hand. "Bad memories?" "Ancient history, nothing worth dwelling on." They checked into the boutique hotel Victoria had recommended, or rather, insisted upon. The Fairmont Olympic, with its marble lobby and crystal chandeliers, made Madison feel underdressed despite her carefully chosen outfit. David, however, seemed perfectly at ease, chatting with the concierge about restaurant recommendations like he'd stayed in luxury hotels his entire life. "How do you do that?" Madison asked as they rode the elevator to their room. "Do what?" "Fit in everywhere. You're as comfortable here as you were at that dive bar last week." David's smile was enigmatic. "I guess I'm adaptable." Their room overlooked Elliott Bay, the late afternoon sun casting golden light across the water. Madison stood at the window, watching ferries cross between the islands, while David unpacked his garment bag with methodical precision. "Nervous about tomorrow?" he asked, hanging up his suit. "Terrified," Madison admitted. "Victoria's friends are going to take one look at me and wonder what you're doing with the strange little sister." "Hey," David moved behind her, hand settling on her shoulders. "You're brilliant, talented, and beautiful. Anyone who can't see that isn't worth your time." Madison leaned back against his chest, drawing comfort from his certainty. "What if they ask how we met? Victoria's going to think it's pathetic that I picked you up at a coffee shop." "We met through mutual appreciation of good coffee and terrible laptop formatting. There's nothing pathetic about that." That evening, they attended the rehearsal dinner at an upscale steakhouse in Belltown. Madison wore a navy dress she'd bought specifically for the occasion, while David looked effortlessly handsome in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her monthly rent. The moment they walked into the private dining room, Victoria swooped toward them like a perfectly groomed hawk. She wore a cream-colored silk dress that probably cost more than Madison's entire wardrobe, her blonde hair styled in loose waves that looked casual but had likely taken hours to achieve. "Natty, you look." Victoria paused, her gaze sweeping over Madison's appearance with barely concealed assessment. "Nice. Very appropriate." "Thanks, Vic. This is David." Victoria turned toward him with her practiced smile, the one she used for networking events and first meetings with important clients. But as her eyes met David's, something strange happened. The smile faltered, her face going pale beneath her carefully applied makeup. David had gone completely still beside Madison, his hand tightening almost imperceptibly on her waist. "Victoria," he said quietly. "David." Her voice was barely a whisper. Madison looked between them, confusion growing. "Wait, do you two know each other?" The silence stretched uncomfortably long. Around them, the rehearsal dinner continued, clinking glasses, animated conversations, laughter from the head table where the groomsmen were telling stories. But in their small corner of the room, time seemed suspended. Victoria started, then stopped, her usual composure completely shattered. We used to know each other, David said finally. A long time ago. Madison felt something cold settle in her stomach. Know each other how? Before either could answer, Jonathan appeared at Victoria's side, sliding his arm around her waist with proprietary ease. He was exactly what Madison had expected. Tall, conventionally handsome, with the kind of confident smile that suggested he'd never doubted his place in the world. "Babe, you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." Victoria seemed to shake herself, the practiced smile sliding back into place, though it didn't reach her eyes. "I'm fine, Jonathan. This is my sister Madison, and her friend, David." "Date," Madison corrected firmly, though her voice sounded strange even to herself. Jonathan extended a hand toward David. "Great to meet you, man. Thanks for coming to celebrate with us." David hesitated for just a fraction of a second before accepting the handshake. "Congratulations. Victoria looks very happy." "She is. We both are," Jonathan beamed, oblivious to the tension crackling between his fiancé and Madison's date. "What line of work are you in, David?" "Family law." "No kidding. I actually know quite a few lawyers in Seattle. What firm?" "I'm in Portland now," David said carefully. "Made the move a couple years back." Madison watched this exchange with growing unease. There was something happening here that she didn't understand, currents of communication flowing beneath the surface conversation. Victoria kept stealing glances at David when she thought no one was looking, and he seemed to be working very hard to focus anywhere but on her. "Well, we should probably get to our seats," Victoria said suddenly. "The toasts will be starting soon." They were seated at a table with various distant relatives Madison barely knew. Victoria's strategic way of keeping her sister from the more important guests, no doubt. But as they made their way across the room, Madison caught fragments of whispered conversations. "Is that David Chen? I thought he'd moved away. Victoria must be dying. Can you believe he had the nerve to show up?" Madison's confusion deepened. These people knew David? But how? He'd said he practiced law in Portland, that he'd moved there after law school. When would he have crossed paths with Victoria's social circle? During the appetizer course, she leaned close to him. "David, what's going on? How do you know these people?" He set down his fork, looking suddenly tired. "Madison, there's something I need to tell you. Something I should have mentioned before, but I didn't think. I never imagined." "What?" Before he could answer, the sound of silverware against crystal filled the room. Jonathan stood at the head table, glass raised, grinning broadly. "Thank you all for being here tonight. Victoria and I are so grateful to have our closest friends and family with us as we celebrate our last night as an engaged couple." Laughter rippled through the room. Madison tried to focus on the toast, but her attention kept drifting to the rigid set of David's shoulders, the way his jaw was clenched tight. "Victoria is the most amazing woman I've ever met," Jonathan continued. "Smart, beautiful, successful, everything a man could want in a partner. She's had her heart broken before, but she trusted me enough to give love another chance." The words hit like physical blows. Madison saw Victoria's face go white, saw her steal another glance at David. The pieces were starting to fall into place, forming a picture she desperately didn't want to see. "Some of you know it took her a while to say yes when I proposed," Jonathan laughed. "She told me she needed to be sure that she'd been hurt badly in the past and couldn't go through that again. But persistence pays off, and here we are." More laughter, more applause. Madison felt like she was drowning. "So please join me in toasting the beautiful bride-to-be who finally found the courage to love again." Glasses raised throughout the room. Madison lifted hers mechanically, her movements feeling disconnected from her body. Beside her, David's glass remained on the table. As the toast concluded and conversations resumed, Madison turned to face him fully. "You were engaged to my sister." It wasn't a question. David closed his eyes briefly. "Yes." "When?" 2 years ago. The timeline crashed over her like ice water. 2 years ago. Right before David had moved to Portland,
right before he'd started going by David Chen instead of his full name, right before he'd sworn off serious relationships until meeting her at the coffee shop. She broke your heart. Completely. Madison stared at him, this man she'd thought she was falling in love with, and realized she didn't know him at all. Every conversation they'd had, every moment of intimacy they'd shared, had been built on lies of omission. Madison, David started, reaching for her hand. She pulled away. Don't.
Around them, the rehearsal dinner continued in blissful ignorance. People laughed and chatted, unaware that Madison Moore's world had just shattered into pieces too small to put back together. Madison excused herself from the table, her legs unsteady as she navigated through clusters of wedding guests toward the restaurant's bathroom. She needed space to think, to process what had just exploded her understanding of the past 2 months. The bathroom was mercifully empty, all gleaming marble and soft lighting that made her reflection look ghostly. Madison gripped the edge of the sink, staring at herself in the mirror. How had she been so blind? How had she missed the signs? David's reluctance to talk about his past relationships, his knowledge of expensive restaurants and hotels, despite claiming to live simply in Portland. The way he'd gone quiet during the drive to Seattle, that shadow that had crossed his face when he mentioned memories. The bathroom door opened, and Victoria walked in, her heels clicking against the marble floor. In the harsh lighting, Madison could see the cracks in her sister's perfect facade, the slight smudge of lipstick, the tension lines around her eyes. "We need to talk," Victoria said quietly. "Do we? Because it seems like you and David already had your conversation 2 years ago." Victoria moved to the mirror beside Madison, pretending to check her reflection while they spoke. "You don't understand the situation." "Then explain it to me." Madison turned to face her sister directly. "Explain how my boyfriend is your ex-fiancé, and neither of you thought to mention this tiny detail." "He's not your boyfriend, Maddie. Not really." The casual cruelty in Victoria's voice was devastating. What's that supposed to mean? Think about it. A successful lawyer, suddenly interested in a freelance graphic designer who spends her weekends alone? Come on, you're smarter than this. Madison felt heat rise in her cheeks. "You think he's using me?" "I think he saw an opportunity for revenge and took it." Victoria's voice was cold, clinical. David always was vindictive when things didn't go his way. "That's not true. You don't know him anymore." Victoria laughed, a sound without humor. "I know him better than you ever will. We were together for 3 years, Maddie. 3 years. We lived together, planned a future together. I know exactly who David Chen is beneath that charming exterior." "Then why did you break up with him?" The question hung in the air between them. Victoria's reflection went very still in the mirror. "Because he wasn't enough," she said finally. "He wanted this small life, a house in the suburbs, kids, quiet weekends at home. I wanted more. I deserved more." "So you threw away 3 years because he wasn't ambitious enough?" "I threw away 3 years because I realized I was settling." Victoria turned to face Madison fully. "Just like you're settling now. Just like you always settle." The words hit like physical blows. Madison had heard variations of this her entire life, that she wasn't ambitious enough, wasn't driven enough, wasn't enough, period. "David chose me," Madison said quietly. "He chose me over everyone else. David chose you because you're convenient, because you're safe, because you remind him of what he thought he wanted before I showed him what he could actually have." "You're wrong." "Am I? Then why didn't he tell you about me? If this relationship is so real, so meaningful, why keep his past a secret?" Madison had no answer for that, and Victoria's smile was sharp with triumph. "He's using you to get back at me, Maddie, and you're letting him because you're so desperate to be chosen by someone, anyone, that you can't see what's right in front of you." The bathroom door opened again, and an elderly woman entered, forcing both sisters to step back and pretend normalcy.
Madison used the interruption to escape, pushing past Victoria and back into the dining room. David was still at their table, though he'd barely touched his food. He looked up as she approached, his expression hopeful and anxious. "Madison, please let me explain." "Not here." Her voice was steadier than she felt. "We're leaving." "But the dinner isn't over." "It is for us." They rode the elevator to their room in silence, the weight of unspoken words pressing down between them. Once inside, Madison moved to the window, putting distance between them, while David remained near the door like he wasn't sure he was welcome. "Start talking," she said without turning around. "Her name was Victoria Chen when I knew her," David began. "We met at a bar association event 4 years ago. She was working at a marketing firm, ambitious and brilliant and unlike anyone I'd ever met." Madison pressed her forehead against the cool glass, watching the lights of the city blur. "We moved in together after 8 months. I thought we were building something real. We talked about marriage, about starting a family. I bought a ring." "What happened?" "I proposed at her favorite restaurant. She said yes, but she seemed distant. For weeks afterward, she'd make excuses to avoid wedding planning. She'd change the subject whenever I brought up the future." David's voice was quiet, pained. Madison could hear him moving around the room behind her, probably pacing like he did when he was stressed. "Then one day, I came home early from work and found her packing. She said she couldn't do it anymore, couldn't pretend to want the life I was offering. She said she'd met someone else, someone who could give her the things she deserved." "Jonathan?" "His name was different then, but yes. She'd been seeing him for 2 months, planning her exit, wearing my ring, and sharing my bed." Madison finally turned around. David was sitting on the edge of the bed, his head in his hands. "She took everything, Madison, not just my heart, my confidence, my trust, and my own judgment. I couldn't stay in Seattle after that. Too many memories, too many mutual friends asking questions I couldn't answer." "So you changed your name and moved to Portland?" "I legally dropped Christopher from my name, yes. Started over completely. I swore I'd never let anyone get that close again." The pieces were falling into place, but Madison still felt like she was missing crucial parts of the puzzle.
Then why did you start dating me? If you'd sworn off relationships, why take the risk? David looked up at her, his brown eyes sincere and pained. "Because you were nothing like her. Because when I was with you, I forgot about all the reasons I'd built walls around my heart. You made me want to try again." "Even though you knew Victoria was my sister?" "I didn't know." The words came out in a rush. "You said your sister's name was Victoria, but so do a million other women. You said she was successful and lived in Seattle, but that describes half the professional women in the city. I never made the connection." "But you must have suspected something when I mentioned the wedding." "Victoria Moore marrying Jonathan Hayes. Different last names, different man. How was I supposed to know Jonathan Hayes was the same person who stole my fiancé 2 years ago?" Madison sank into the room's single chair, suddenly exhausted. "This is insane. This whole situation is completely insane. I know, and I know how it looks. I know what Victoria probably told you in the bathroom." "How did you—" "Because I know Victoria. She's probably convinced you that this is all some elaborate revenge plot, that I sought you out specifically to get back at her." Madison's silence was answer enough. "But it's not true, Madison. I had no idea who you were when we met. I fell for you completely separate from any history with your sister. What we have is real." "Is it? Because I feel like I don't know you at all. David Chen, the simple Portland lawyer who moved there after law school, that person doesn't exist, does he?" "He does exist. He's who I became after Victoria destroyed who I used to be. He's who I am when I'm with you." Madison stared at him, this man she'd thought she was falling in love with, and realized she had no idea what was true anymore. Every moment they'd shared was now colored by the knowledge of his past with Victoria. Every sweet gesture, every moment of intimacy, were they genuine or just echoes of what he'd once felt for her sister?
I need air, she said, standing abruptly. Madison, please. I need to think, alone. She grabbed her keycard and left him sitting there, looking as broken as she felt. Madison found herself wandering the streets of downtown Seattle at nearly midnight, her heels clicking against wet pavement as a light drizzle began to fall. The city felt foreign and unwelcoming, all sharp angles and harsh lights that reflected off puddles like broken glass. She ducked into an all-night diner, sliding into a corner booth where she ordered coffee she didn't want and stared out at the empty street. Her phone buzzed repeatedly, texts from David that she couldn't bring herself to read, a missed call from Victoria that she definitely wouldn't return. The waitress, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and sensible shoes, refilled Madison's cup without being asked. "Rough night, honey?" Madison managed a weak smile. Family drama. The worst kind. Always cut the deepest when it's people who are supposed to love you. The simple wisdom hit harder than it should have. Madison wrapped her hands around the warm mug, trying to organize her chaotic thoughts. What did she actually know for certain? David had been engaged to Victoria. Victoria had left him for Jonathan. David had moved to Portland and changed his name. He'd met Madison by chance, or what seemed like chance, and they'd developed feelings for each other. But was any of it real? Had David recognized something familiar in her, some echo of Victoria that drew him in? Was she just a substitute, a consolation prize that happened to come with the bonus of potential revenge? Her phone rang again. This time, it was an unknown Seattle number. "Hello? Madison? It's Jonathan. I got your number from Victoria. Are you okay? She said you left the dinner upset." Madison almost laughed at the absurdity. Here was Victoria's fiancé checking on her while her own sister probably celebrated her humiliation. "I'm fine, Jonathan. I just needed some air." "Look, I don't know what happened between you and David, but Victoria told me there was some history there. If you need someone to talk to, someone neutral, I'm happy to listen." Something in his voice made Madison pause. There was genuine concern there, none of Victoria's calculated manipulation. "Actually," she heard herself saying, "maybe that would help." They met at a 24-hour cafe near Pike Place Market. Jonathan arrived still wearing his suit from the rehearsal dinner, his hair slightly disheveled like he'd been running his hands through it. He looked less polished, more human. "Thanks for this," Madison said, as he sat down across from her. "I know it's weird, calling your fiancé's future brother-in-law at midnight." "Victoria's really upset," Jonathan said carefully. "She won't tell me exactly what happened, just that your date turned out to be someone from her past." Madison studied his face. "How much do you know about Victoria's relationship before you?" "Some. I know she was engaged to someone who hurt her badly. She doesn't like talking about it, and says it's ancient history." "What if I told you that someone was David, my David?" Jonathan went very still. "I'd say that's either the worst coincidence in history or something else entirely." "Victoria thinks he's using me to get revenge on her." "What do you think?" The question was asked without judgment, genuine curiosity. Madison realized how long it had been since someone had cared about her opinion without trying to shape it. "I think I don't know anything anymore. 2 months ago, I thought I'd found someone who saw me for who I really am. Now I wonder if he was just seeing her." Jonathan was quiet for a long moment, stirring his coffee absently. "Can I tell you something about Victoria?" "Okay." "She has this way of making people doubt themselves. It's not always malicious. Sometimes I think she doesn't even realize she's doing it, but she sees weakness and she pokes at it." Madison felt heat rise in her cheeks. "So you think I'm being weak?" "I think you're being human, but I also think Victoria has been telling you who you are for so long that you've forgotten you get to decide that for yourself."
The words hit like a revelation. Madison stared at this man who barely knew her but seemed to understand something fundamental that she'd missed. "She's always been the golden child," Madison said quietly. "Perfect grades, perfect looks, perfect career. I've spent my whole life feeling like the consolation prize." "Maybe that's exactly why David fell for you." "What do you mean?" Jonathan leaned forward, his expression earnest. Think about it. Victoria is a lot. Beautiful, successful, demanding. Maybe what David loved about her became exhausting over time. Maybe what he loves about you is that you're not trying to be anything other than exactly who you are. Or maybe I'm just easier to manipulate. Madison, I've watched you tonight. The way David looks at you, that's not manipulation. That's a man who's completely gone for someone. Before Madison could respond, her phone lit up with another call from David. This time, she answered. "Where are you?" His voice was strained with worry. "I've been driving around looking for you." "I'm safe. I'm with Jonathan." A pause. "Jonathan? As in the groom Jonathan?" "We're just talking. I needed perspective from someone neutral." "Madison, please come back to the hotel. We need to finish this conversation." She looked across the table at Jonathan, who was carefully studying his coffee cup to give her privacy. "I'll be back soon." "I love you," David said quietly. "Whatever you're thinking right now, whatever Victoria told you, I love you. Not her memory, not some version of revenge, you." The line went dead. Madison stared at her phone, those 3 words echoing in her mind. It was the first time either of them had said it. "He loves me," she said, almost to herself. Jonathan smiled. "Yeah, that was pretty obvious to everyone except you." "But what if Victoria's right? What if this is all some elaborate game?" "Then you'll figure it out. But what if she's wrong? What if you walk away from something real because you're afraid of being hurt?" Madison thought about David's face when he'd told her about his failed engagement, the raw pain in his voice. She thought about the way he'd encouraged her art, the way he'd made her feel seen and valued. She thought about Saturday mornings at the coffee shop, about his terrible cooking attempts, about the way he'd held her during thunderstorms. "I have to go," she said, standing abruptly. "Good luck tomorrow. For what it's worth, I think you're braver than you give yourself credit for." Madison walked back through the drizzling Seattle streets, her mind clearer than it had been in hours. She had questions that needed answers, truths that needed confronting, but running away wouldn't solve anything. The hotel lobby was nearly empty at 1 in the morning, just a sleepy desk clerk and the ambient glow of expensive lighting. Madison rode the elevator to her floor, keycard trembling slightly in her hand. She found David sitting in the hallway outside their room, his back against the door. He looked exhausted, his suit wrinkled, his hair disheveled from worrying hands. "You came back," he said, getting to his feet. "I came back. I was starting to think you wouldn't." Madison looked at him, really looked at him, not through the lens of Victoria's doubts or her own insecurities, but as if seeing him clearly for the first time. "Tell me the truth," she said. "When you first asked me out, was there any part of you that hoped it would hurt Victoria?" David met her gaze steadily. "No. When I asked you out, I had no idea Victoria Moore existed. I just knew that I'd met someone who made me want to risk my heart again. And now? Now that you know who she is? Now I know that fate has a twisted sense of humor, but it doesn't change how I feel about you. And now?" Madison stepped closer, searching his face for any hint of deception. "Victoria says you're using me." Victoria said a lot of things 2 years ago, too. Most of them turned out to be lies designed to make herself feel better about her choices. She says you wanted a small life, that she wanted more. David's smile was sad but genuine. I wanted a life with her. She wanted a lifestyle. There's a difference. Madison reached up and touched his face, feeling the slight stubble, the warmth of his skin. "What do you want with me?" "Everything," he said simply. "Every morning, every argument, every quiet Sunday. I want to watch you become the illustrator you dream of being. I want to build something real with you, something that isn't about impressing anyone or competing with anyone. I want you, Madison, just you." Standing there in the hotel hallway at 1 in the morning, with her sister's wedding looming in a few hours, Madison made her choice. "Then you've got me," she whispered, and kissed him. The morning of Victoria's wedding dawned crisp and clear, Seattle's notorious gray clouds parting to reveal brilliant blue sky. Madison woke in David's arms, sunlight streaming through their hotel window, and for a moment, she could almost forget the chaos waiting for them downstairs. "Second thoughts?" David asked softly, his voice rough with sleep. "About you? No. About attending this wedding? Definitely."
He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. We could always drive back to Portland. Pretend none of this happened. Madison was tempted. God, was she tempted. But running away felt like giving Victoria exactly what she wanted. Proof that her little sister would always choose the path of least resistance. No, I'm done hiding from my own life. The wedding was being held at the Fairmont's Grand Ballroom, an opulent space with crystal chandeliers and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Elliott Bay. Madison and David arrived fashionably late. Not late enough to cause a scene, but late enough to slip in without extended small talk. Madison had chosen her outfit carefully, a deep emerald dress that complemented her dark hair and made her feel confident without upstaging the bride. David wore a navy suit that fit him perfectly, looking every inch the successful professional he was.
They found seats in the back, close enough to witness the ceremony, but far enough to avoid Victoria's direct line of sight. As the processional music began, Madison felt David's hand find hers, his fingers intertwining with hers in quiet support. The bridesmaids walked down the aisle in pale pink silk, followed by Victoria herself. Madison had to admit her sister looked stunning. Her dress was a masterpiece of lace and silk that probably cost more than most people's cars. Her hair arranged in an elaborate updo that showcased diamond earrings that caught the light with every movement. But as Victoria passed their row, her eyes found them immediately. The stumble was almost imperceptible, a tiny break in her graceful stride that probably only Madison and David noticed. Victoria's face remained serene, but Madison caught the flash of something darker in her expression. Anger, maybe, or fear. Jonathan stood at the altar looking genuinely happy, his smile broad and uncomplicated as he watched his bride approach. Madison found herself hoping, despite everything, that this would work out for them. Jonathan seemed like a good man, caught in the crossfire of someone else's drama. The ceremony proceeded without incident. Victoria and Jonathan exchanged vows they'd written themselves. His heartfelt and sincere, hers polished and perfect like everything else about her. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, Madison felt David's grip tighten slightly on her hand, but his expression remained neutral. The cocktail hour was held on the hotel's terrace, with sweeping views of the Sound and the distant Olympic Mountains. Madison and David found a quiet corner and nursed glasses of champagne, watching Seattle's elite mingle and network even at a wedding. "You okay?" Madison asked, noticing how David's jaw was set tight. "Just strange, seeing her so happy. For a long time, I thought I'd ruined her chances at love." "David, I know it was never about me, but still." They were interrupted by the arrival of a woman Madison didn't recognize, tall, elegant, with silver hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. "David Chen," the woman said, her voice carrying decades of authority. "I wondered if you'd have the courage to show your face today." David straightened, his professional mask sliding into place. "Judge Morrison, how are you?" "Curious, very curious about what brings you back to Seattle and to this particular wedding." Her gaze shifted to Madison with obvious assessment. "And you must be the infamous sister." Madison felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I'm sorry, do we know each other?" "Margaret Morrison, Superior Court. I've known your family for years through various charitable boards. Your sister made quite a production of her heartbreak when David left town." The words hung in the air like an accusation. Madison felt the familiar knot of anxiety forming in her stomach, that old feeling of being judged and found wanting by Victoria's social circle. But then David stepped closer, his hand settling on the small of her back in a gesture of quiet support. "Madison is here as my guest," he said evenly. "Whatever happened between Victoria and me is ancient history." Judge Morrison's smile was razor sharp. Ancient history has a way of repeating itself, doesn't it? As she walked away, Madison felt her newfound confidence wobble. Around them, other guests were stealing glances and whispering behind their hands. The weight of their judgment pressed down like a physical thing. "Maybe we should go," she whispered. "Hey," David turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "Look at me, not them, me."
Madison met his eyes, drawing strength from the certainty she found there. "These people don't matter," he said quietly. "Their opinions don't define us. The only thing that matters is what we know to be true." Before Madison could respond, the sound of silverware against crystal called everyone's attention to the head table. Victoria stood, radiant in her wedding finery, microphone in hand. "Thank you all so much for being here today," she began, her voice carrying easily across the terrace. "Jonathan and I are overwhelmed by your love and support." Her gaze swept across the crowd, lingering deliberately on Madison and David. "Marriage is about finding someone who sees the best in you, even when you can't see it yourself. It's about trust, about loyalty, about choosing each other every single day." A pause, her smile turning slightly sharper. "It's about being with someone who appreciates what they have, instead of always looking backward." The barb was aimed directly at them, and Madison felt her cheeks burn. Around them, guests shifted uncomfortably, sensing undercurrents they couldn't quite identify. But David remained perfectly still, his expression unreadable. When Victoria finished her speech and the applause died down, he simply raised his glass in a small private toast. "To move forward," he said, just for Madison's ears. The reception moved inside for dinner, an elaborate affair with multiple courses and speeches from various family members and friends. Madison found herself seated at a table with distant relatives who seemed more interested in gossip than conversation, leaving her feeling isolated despite being surrounded by people. During the salad course, Victoria approached their table, her wedding dress rustling softly as she moved. "Madison, could I speak with you privately?" It wasn't really a question. Madison glanced at David, who nodded slightly, and followed her sister to a quiet alcove off the main ballroom. "You came," Victoria said, without preamble. "You invited me." "I didn't think you'd have the nerve, not after last night." Madison straightened her shoulders, channeling some of the strength David had helped her find. "Maybe you don't know me as well as you think you do." Victoria's laugh was cold. "Oh, I know exactly who you are, Maddie. You're the little sister who always wanted what I had, and now you think you've won some kind of prize." "This isn't about winning or losing, Victoria. This is about my life." "Your life? He was mine first. Everything about him. His laugh, his habits, the way he takes his coffee. I discovered all of that. You're just getting my leftovers." The words were designed to wound, and they did. But Madison had spent the past 24 hours learning to trust her own judgment instead of her sister's voice in her head. "If he was really yours," she said quietly, "he'd still be with you." Victoria's composure cracked for just a moment, revealing something raw and desperate underneath. "You have no idea what you're getting into. He'll never love you the way he loved me." "You're right," Madison said, surprising herself with her calm. "He'll love me better, because I won't break his heart and then blame him for the pieces."
She turned to walk away, but Victoria's voice stopped her. "This won't last, you know. When the novelty wears off, when he realizes you're nothing special, he'll leave, and I'll be here to pick up the pieces, again." Madison looked back at her sister, beautiful, successful, miserable Victoria, and felt something shift inside her chest. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel smaller in Victoria's presence. "I hope you're happy," she said simply. "I really do. But your happiness doesn't require my misery anymore." She walked back to the reception, where David was waiting with worried eyes and a gentle smile. "Everything okay?" Madison slipped her hand into his, feeling the solid warmth of his palm against hers. Across the room, Victoria rejoined her new husband, her smile bright and brittle as glass. "Everything's perfect," Madison said, and meant it. As the evening wore on, the whispers and stares gradually faded into background noise. Madison danced with David to songs that had nothing to do with Victoria, laughed at his terrible jokes, and felt herself settling into her own skin in a way she never had before. When they finally left the reception, Seattle's skyline glittering beyond the hotel windows, Madison realized she wasn't the same person who'd arrived 24 hours earlier. Victoria's opinion no longer held the power to define her worth. She was Madison Moore, artist, dreamer, someone worthy of love exactly as she was. "So," David said as they walked to their car, his arm around her waist, "ready to go home?" Madison looked back at the hotel one last time, then up at the man who'd helped her find her courage. "With you, I'm ready for anything." 3 weeks after the wedding, Madison was sketching in her Portland apartment when her phone rang. Victoria's name flashed on the screen, the first time her sister had contacted her since Seattle. Madison let it go to voicemail, then immediately played the message back. "Maddie, it's me. We need to talk. Something's happened. Call me back." Victoria's voice sounded different, smaller somehow, stripped of its usual confident edge. Against her better judgment, Madison dialed back. "Thank God you called," Victoria said without preamble. "Are you sitting down?" "Vic, what's wrong?" "It's Jonathan. He wants a separation." Madison felt the bottom drop out of her stomach. "What? But you just got married 3 weeks ago." I know. It's insane. He says he needs space, that things move too fast." Victoria's voice cracked. "He moved out yesterday." "Victoria, I'm so sorry. What happened?" There was a long pause, punctuated by what sounded like Victoria trying to compose herself. I may have said some things after the wedding about you and David." Madison's grip tightened on the phone. "What kind of things?" "I was upset, okay? Seeing him there with you, looking so happy, it brought back everything I'd buried. So I told Jonathan about David's history, about how he was probably using you for revenge. And? And Jonathan got angry, really angry. He said I was being cruel and manipulative, that I couldn't stand to see anyone else happy if I wasn't the center of attention." Victoria's voice was barely a whisper now. "He said he was starting to see a side of me he didn't like." Madison closed her eyes, feeling a complicated mix of sympathy and frustration. "Victoria." But that wasn't the worst part. He started asking questions about my version of events, about what really happened with David and me. "What do you mean?" Another long pause. When Victoria spoke again, her voice was thick with tears. "He called David." Madison's blood ran cold. "He what?" "Yesterday, after he moved his stuff out, he called David directly and asked for his side of the story. And David told him everything." "Everything" means what, exactly? "The truth." The word came out like a confession. The whole truth about why we really broke up. Madison waited, her heart pounding. She could hear Victoria breathing on the other end of the line, gathering courage for whatever she was about to reveal. "I cheated on him, Maddie. Not with Jonathan, before Jonathan. With his best friend, Marcus, for months." The revelation hit like a physical blow. Madison sank into her chair, trying to process this new information. "David found out 3 days before I broke up with him. He walked into Marcus's apartment and found us together. But he didn't confront us. He just left." "And you never told him you knew he'd seen him?" "I couldn't. I was too ashamed. So when he started acting distant, I convinced myself it was because he wasn't ready for marriage, that he was getting cold feet. It was easier than facing what I'd done." Madison's mind raced back through everything. David's pain when he'd talked about Victoria leaving him, his bewilderment at her sudden change of heart. "So you let him think he wasn't enough for you?" "Yes." The word was barely audible. "And then, when Jonathan came along, I used David's heartbreak as proof that I deserved better. I rewrote the whole story to make myself the victim." Victoria. Madison didn't know what to say. This changed everything she thought she understood about David's past, about Victoria's motivations, about the entire situation. "Jonathan said he can't trust me now. He said if I could lie about something that fundamental, what else was I lying about? He's staying at a hotel while he processes everything." For the first time in their adult lives,
Madison heard her sister truly vulnerable, not performing vulnerability for sympathy, but genuinely broken. What are you going to do? I don't know. I keep thinking about what you said at the wedding, about how if David was really mine, he'd still be with me. But the truth is, he never had a real choice. I took that away from him. Madison felt a strange shift happening, like tectonic plates moving beneath the foundation of their relationship. Why are you telling me this now?
Because Jonathan was right about one thing. I couldn't stand seeing you happy. I've spent my whole life being the golden child, the successful one, the one everyone admired. And then you showed up with David, looking genuinely content in a way I'd never seen before, and I couldn't handle it. Victoria's voice grew steadier, more determined. I wanted to poison that for you because I was jealous, not of David, of you, of your ability to be happy with a simple, honest life, while I kept chasing after things that looked impressive from the outside but left me empty inside. Madison sat in stunned silence, trying to absorb this complete reversal of everything she'd believed about her sister's motivations. Maddie, are you there? I'm here. I don't know what to say. Say you'll forgive me. Someday. Not now. I know I don't deserve it now. But someday. Madison looked around her small apartment, at the easel in the corner where she'd been working on illustrations for a children's book, at the photos of her and David scattered around the coffee table, at the life she'd built that Victoria had once dismissed as settling for less. I'm not sure forgiveness is mine to give, she said carefully. You need to make this right with David. I know. I called him this morning. And? And he hung up on me, which I deserved. Victoria's laugh was hollow. But I'm going to keep trying. He deserves to know the truth, even if it's 2 years too late. What about Jonathan? I don't know if I can fix that. I lied to him about something huge, and lies have a way of multiplying, but I have to try. After they hung up, Madison sat in her living room for a long time, watching dust motes dance in the afternoon sunlight. The phone call had upended her understanding of so many things, but strangely, it also made her feel more secure in her relationship with David. He'd been telling the truth all along, about Victoria, about his feelings, about everything. The man she'd fallen in love with was exactly who he'd presented himself to be. When David arrived for their dinner plans that evening, Madison was ready with the full story. They sat on her couch, Chinese takeout growing cold between them, as she recounted Victoria's confession. She called me too, David said quietly when Madison finished. This morning. I couldn't. I wasn't ready to hear it. Are you ready now? David was quiet for a long moment, staring out Madison's window at the Portland skyline. For 2 years, I thought I'd failed her somehow, that I wasn't ambitious enough, successful enough, exciting enough to keep her interested. Finding out the truth should feel vindicating, but mostly it just feels sad. Sad how? Sad that she was so unhappy with herself that she destroyed something good rather than face her own choices. Sad that she let me carry guilt that was never mine to bear. Madison curled up beside him, resting her head on his shoulder. What happens now? Now we move forward. Victoria's confession doesn't change anything between us. It just confirms what I already knew. What we have is real, Madison. It always was. Even though she was right about one thing, you did love her first. David turned to face her fully, his hands framing her face with gentle certainty. I loved the person I thought she was, but that person never really existed. With you, I get to love exactly who you are, not some idealized version I've created in my head. And if she tries to make amends, if she wants to be friends again, that's up to her to earn, and up to me to decide if I'm interested. But it won't change how I feel about you. Later that night, as they lay in bed listening to rain against the windows, Madison reflected on how much had changed in just a few weeks. She'd gone from being the sister who didn't deserve a +1 to someone who finally understood her own worth. David? I love you too. I should have said it back the other night at the hotel, but I was scared. What changed? Madison smiled in the darkness. I stopped being afraid of taking up space in my own life.
3 days later, Madison received a text from Jonathan. Coffee? I have questions only you can answer. They met at the same cafe where Madison had found clarity during her midnight crisis. Jonathan looked exhausted, his usual polished appearance replaced by rumpled clothes and tired eyes. How did you know? He asked without preamble. At the wedding, when Victoria gave that speech about loyalty and looking backward, you didn't flinch. Everyone else was uncomfortable, but you just looked calm. Madison considered the question carefully. Because I'd already decided Victoria's opinion didn't define my reality anymore. Even though she's your sister? Especially because she's my sister. I spent 26 years trying to earn her approval. It took falling in love to realize I didn't need it. Jonathan stirred his coffee absently. She told me about the cheating, about the lies. I keep wondering if there were signs I missed. What are you going to do? I don't know. I love her, or I love who I thought she was. But trust is like glass, isn't it? Once it's broken, you can put the pieces back together, but it's never quite the same. Madison thought about David, about the way he'd rebuilt his life after Victoria shattered it, about the courage it had taken for him to risk loving again. Sometimes broken things become stronger, she said, but both people have to want to do the work. Jonathan nodded slowly. Victoria wants to try counseling, says she's willing to do whatever it takes. And you? I'm willing to try, but things will have to be different, more honest, more real. As Madison walked home through Portland's tree-lined streets, she felt something settle inside her chest, a deep sense of peace she'd never experienced before. Victoria's confession had freed them all from the lies that had tangled their lives together.
Now they could all choose who they wanted to be, instead of being trapped by who they'd been. 6 months later, Madison stood in the children's section of Powell's books, watching a little girl flip through the pages of Luna's Moonlight Adventure, her first published children's book. The girl's eyes were wide with wonder as she followed Luna, a shy rabbit who discovered she could paint with starlight, on her journey to illuminate the forest for all the nocturnal creatures. "Excuse me," the girl's mother said, approaching Madison. "Are you the author? My daughter has been obsessed with this book since we bought it last week." Madison felt the familiar flutter of pride mixed with disbelief. "I'm an illustrator, Madison Moore." "The pictures are so beautiful. Emma keeps saying she wants to paint with stars too." The little girl looked up at Madison with serious eyes. "Do you think I could really do magic like Luna?" Madison knelt down to Emma's level. "I think the best magic happens when we're brave enough to share what makes us special with the world." After the family left, Madison wandered through the bookstore, still marveling at seeing her work on the shelves. The advance from the publisher had allowed her to quit her more commercial freelance jobs and focus on the illustrations that truly spoke to her soul. Her phone buzzed with a text from David. "Dinner reservation at 7. Wear something you feel beautiful in." Madison smiled, wondering what he was planning. They'd been talking about moving in together, and David had been mysteriously secretive lately, disappearing for mysterious errands and taking hushed phone calls. She chose a deep blue dress that brought out her eyes, not because she was trying to impress anyone, but because it made her feel confident and radiant. The woman in the mirror bore little resemblance to the insecure person who'd attended Victoria's wedding 6 months ago. David picked her up precisely at 7, looking handsome in a dark suit that she'd never seen before. There was nervous energy about him, an anticipation that made Madison curious. "Where are we going?" she asked as he drove through downtown Portland. "You'll see." They pulled up to Riverside Cafe, the same place where they first met. But instead of the usual casual atmosphere, the cafe had been transformed. String lights twinkled overhead, and their corner table was set with white linens and candles. "David, what is this?" He led her to the table, his hand warm and steady on the small of her back. "This is where it all started, where you rescued me from legal formatting hell and changed my entire life." As they sat down, Madison noticed other details: fresh flowers that happened to be sunflowers, her favorites, the vanilla latte and blueberry scone that had been her usual order. Even the view of the Willamette River seemed more magical in the candlelight. "I can't believe you arranged all this," she said softly. "There's more." David reached into his jacket pocket, and Madison's heart skipped a beat as he pulled out a small velvet box.
But instead of opening it immediately, he began to speak. Madison, before I met you, I thought I was broken beyond repair. Victoria had convinced me that I wasn't enough, not ambitious enough, not exciting enough, not worthy of the love I wanted to give. His voice was steady, sure. You showed me that wasn't true. Not because you fixed me, but because you saw who I really was and loved that person completely. Madison felt tears prick her eyes. Around them, the cafe was quiet, except for the soft jazz music playing in the background. I can't believe you arranged all this, she said softly. There's more. David reached into his jacket pocket, and Madison's heart skipped a beat as he pulled out a small velvet box. But instead of opening it immediately, he began to speak. Madison, before I met you, I thought I was broken beyond repair. Victoria had convinced me that I wasn't enough, not ambitious enough, not exciting enough, not worthy of the love I wanted to give. His voice was steady, sure. You showed me that wasn't true. Not because you fixed me, but because you saw who I really was and loved that person completely. Madison felt tears prick her eyes. Around them, the cafe was quiet, except for the soft jazz music playing in the background. You taught me that the right love doesn't require you to be someone different. It celebrates exactly who you are. David slid off his chair and knelt beside her, opening the velvet box to reveal a simple, elegant ring with a stone that caught the candlelight like captured starlight. Madison Moore, will you marry me? Through her tears, Madison saw not just the man proposing to her, but their entire future spread out like a map of possibilities. Sunday mornings with coffee and newspapers, David cheering at her art shows, quiet evenings working side by side, maybe children someday, little ones she'd teach to paint with whatever colors they found beautiful. Yes, she whispered, then louder, yes, absolutely yes. As David slipped the ring onto her finger, Madison felt something shift in the universe, not just for her, but somehow for everyone whose story had intersected with theirs. 2 weeks later, she received an unexpected call from Victoria. Maddie, I have news. Victoria's voice sounded different, cleaner somehow, less performed. Madison had heard through Jonathan that they were in intensive couples therapy, working to rebuild their marriage on more honest foundations. Good news or bad news? Good, I think. Jonathan and I are moving to Portland. Madison nearly dropped her phone. What? Why? Jonathan got offered a position with a smaller firm here. Less money, but better work-life balance. And Victoria paused, I got accepted into a graduate program at Portland State. Social work. Social work? Victoria, that's incredible. I know, it's not what anyone would expect from me, but therapy has made me realize I want to help people instead of just selling them things they don't need. Victoria's voice grew thoughtful. I want to do work that matters, even if it doesn't come with a corner office and a 6-figure salary. Madison felt a cautious hope blooming in her chest. How do you feel about that? Terrified? Excited? Like I'm finally becoming the person I was supposed to be all along. They talked for another hour. Really talked, perhaps for the first time in their adult lives. Victoria shared stories about therapy, about the painful work of examining her patterns of manipulation and control. Madison told her about the engagement, about her book, about the life she was building with David. I'm proud of you, she said near the end of the call, for standing up to me at the wedding, for choosing your own happiness. I never learned how to do that. You're learning now. That's what matters. Maddie, when Jonathan and I move to Portland, would you maybe want to have coffee sometimes? I know I have a lot to make up for, but I'd like to try being sisters again. Real sisters, not whatever toxic dynamic we had before. Madison looked at her engagement ring, thinking about second chances and the courage it took to change. I'd like that, she said. But, Victoria, things will be different this time. I know. I want them to be different. 3 months later, Madison stood in the bridal suite of a small bed and breakfast outside Portland, adjusting her wedding dress for the 3rd time. Unlike Victoria's elaborate affair, Madison had chosen something simple, a flowing ivory dress with delicate lace sleeves and a skirt that moved like water when she walked. Victoria knocked softly on the door. Can I come in?
In the months since moving to Portland, Victoria had softened in ways Madison had never thought possible. The sharp edges of her personality had smoothed into something more genuine. She wore her hair in a simpler style now, her makeup more natural, her clothes chosen for comfort rather than impression. "You look beautiful," Victoria said, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for being here, for helping with the flowers, for everything." Victoria had insisted on handling the floral arrangements, not to control, but to contribute something meaningful to Madison's day. She'd chosen wildflowers and greenery, creating bouquets that looked like they'd been gathered from a meadow. "Maddie, I need to say something before you walk down that aisle." Madison turned to face her sister fully. "I wasted so many years being jealous of a happiness I could have had myself if I'd just been brave enough to be real. You found that courage, and David is lucky to get to love the person you've become." Victoria's eyes filled with tears. "But more than that, I'm lucky to get to know her too. The real you, not the version of yourself you thought I wanted you to be." The sisters embraced, perhaps for the first time, without any undercurrent of competition or resentment. "Are you happy, Vic? Really happy?" Victoria considered the question seriously. "I'm getting there. Jonathan and I are doing the work, slowly, honestly, and school starts next month. I'm nervous but excited." "And David?" "I called him last week. We talked for an hour, really talked. I apologized for the lies, for letting him carry guilt that was never his. He was gracious, kinder than I deserved." Victoria smiled, and for the first time, it reached her eyes completely. "He told me he forgives me. Not for my sake, but for his own, and that he's grateful our story ended the way it did, because it led him to you." Madison felt her heart swell with love, for David, for the journey that had brought them together, even for Victoria and the growth they'd all experienced. The ceremony took place in the bed and breakfast's garden, surrounded by close friends and family. As Madison walked down the petal-strewn path, she saw David waiting for her with that smile that had first captured her heart in a coffee shop on an ordinary Saturday morning. But today felt anything but ordinary. Today felt like the beginning of everything. When the officiant asked if anyone objected to the union, Madison caught Victoria's eye. Her sister smiled and nodded almost imperceptibly. A blessing, a release, a recognition that some loves are meant to heal rather than harm. "I do," Madison said when her moment came, and meant it with every cell of her being. As she and David kissed to seal their marriage, Madison thought about the journey that had brought them here. The pain, the doubts, the moment she'd almost walked away from the best thing that had ever happened to her. But most of all, she thought about the courage it had taken to choose love over fear, truth over convenience, her own happiness over everyone else's expectations. Later, as they danced to their first song as husband and wife, David whispered in her ear, "No regrets?" Madison looked around at the people celebrating with them, Victoria and Jonathan working to rebuild something honest, friends who valued substance over flash, a life built on authentic connection rather than performance. "Not a single one," she said, and meant it completely. 6 months after the wedding, Madison received a package from Victoria, a framed photo from that day showing Madison and David's first dance. But it was the note tucked inside that made her cry happy tears. "To my sister, who taught me that the best revenge against people who don't believe in you is living a life so authentic and joyful that their doubts become irrelevant. Thank you for showing me what real happiness looks like. Love, Victoria. P.S. My first semester grades are attached. Dean's List. Who would have thought?" Madison hung the photo in their new apartment, right next to her framed book cover and a candid shot of David cooking breakfast while she sketched at the kitchen table. It was, she thought, a perfect representation of the life they'd built together. Not perfect in its flawlessness, but perfect in its honesty, its messiness, its capacity for growth and forgiveness and joy. And every morning when she saw it, Madison was reminded that the best stories don't end with happily ever after. They end with, "and so the real adventure began." Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time.
Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.